Hello everyone, most of you know me. My name is Elmo Terry Morgan. I'm on faculty in the Department of Africana Studies and also TAPS, which is Theater Arts and Performance Studies. I want to welcome you to one of the events in the Black Lavender Experience, and I'll explain that briefly because this is for the camera and for posterity. But this event is also part of Brown's Brazenly Brown lecture series, where we get to tout ourselves and toot our horns a little bit because Brown is 250 plus. And it is very appropriate that our special guest for this presentation, I'm going to call it, and also for the Black Lavender Experience is Daniel Alexander Jones, graduate of Brown, master's in theater arts, 1993, but he's also an alumnus of Rites Reason Theatre, where we had the pleasure of producing one of his very early plays, Bloodletting, about the Egyptian mythology, Isis and Osiris, and then we worked with you and your brother at UMass Amherst.
That's right.
And I got to meet your mom.
That's right.
There. And then in class today, Daniel came to visit my Black Lavender class, and he reminded me of something that I had forgotten, that you got your first professional gig working at the Smithsonian Institute.
Yes, through you.
Yeah, and I had no idea. You know, when you get old and gray, you know, things kind of go away from you from time to time. But the importance of the Black Lavender Experience is that Danny is in the DNA of this event, and also in the course Black Lavender, a study of plays with Black LGBT content, which began in 1998, the actual course. When I came to Brown, because I am an alumnus, but after the George Houston Bass passed, and most of you know George Houston Bass was the founding artistic director of Rites Reason. He was my friend, teacher, and mentor for 20 years. And I inherited a course that I still teach called Voices Beneath the Veil, which is a study of, African American plays from 1858 to the present. It gets harder to get to the present because it's been 22 years later since I taught the course, a lot more plays. By the time I got here, every year at least one student would come to me and say, I want to do a play that deals with Black, gay, lesbian, queer issues. And my response was, good luck. Because I didn't know anybody who had written anything like that. So years go by, and then in the fall of 97, 4 students came to me. And they each said, I want to do something queer. And then we even adjusted the word queer. And so LGBTQ, all of that. And I finally said, I think the universe is tapping me on my shoulder. So I said, if you're willing to help me build a course, I'll do it. And I got a grant from the Office of the Dean of the college when I was able to hire a graduate student at the time, Kelly Garrett, who was in the MFA playwriting program. And we started to try to build this course, and of course then the internet was still a baby. So we did a lot of actually writing letters and typing and making telephone calls. So I'm trying to figure out this course. I had 2 contacts. Brian Freeman, one of the original trio of Homo Afro Homos, who the group performed at Rites Reason in the fall of '91. And at that time he gave me his address and phone number, and I said, let me see if it still works. And I did, I got him. But I said, I know who I need to contact, Daniel Alexander Jones. And I said, Daniel, we're trying to build this course. And he wrote me back, because I said, and I need some names of people. Who's out there in the world? And he wrote back, and I still have a little piece of paper. He says, this will happen. And I said, wow. So it was through Daniel that I started getting my first playwrights. Sharon Bridgeforth, Renita Martin. And then they kept giving me names. And I still go to them to ask them about who are the new up-and-coming writers. So Daniel is integral to building the Black Lavender course, out of which grew the Black Lavender Experience. So since 2009, and Daniel was in the first year of Black Lavender when we did the Book of Daniel. Mm-hmm. So Daniel, well accomplished, he's a teacher's dream. You know, really, when you teach and then people go out into the world and something, you don't know what they're going to do. Excuse me, but Daniel has been, for 22 years since I've known him, one of the foremost self-generative artists on the cutting edge. He helped us, me and my students, to expand and deepen the concept of the term queer and what that all means, and also what it means to be human. He has received numerous Genius Awards, I call them, and the most recent one is the Doris Duke Award. If you want to be thoroughly impressed, you Google that bad boy. It comes with cash, not a little dust collector with a statuette or a plaque. It brings some serious cash and financial planning assistance. But that just lets you know the high regard in which he is held. Daniel is the head of playwriting at Fordham, associate professor there. He's worked in some of the most, I'd say, rigorous and important playwriting and theater spaces in the country, from Austin and to Minneapolis, New York, California. So he's got all of that. So we're just glad that he's here, and I'm sure that you're going to really enjoy Daniel's presentation. And we hope that you will come out this Saturday over at Churchill House in the George Houston Bass Performing Arts Space, the primary home of the Department of Africana Studies, Rites Reason Theatre, where he's going to be performing the critically acclaimed Jomama Jones Radiate. So, before I do, by law, I must do this, and it is important. These are the fire codes, so I will do my best with this. In the event of a fire alarm, please proceed calmly to the nearby exit, leave the building, and move away from the doorway. Please note the location of nearby exits. So we see they're well lit, over here. The closest exit may not be where you entered. Be aware that the way you entered may not be the most direct way out. If anything happens, follow me. I'm getting out of here, okay? Sitting or standing in the aisles and doorways is not permitted. Smoking is not allowed inside any university building. Please turn off or silence all pagers and cell phones, anything that makes noise, beep, bop, boop, boop, okay? So we thank you for all of that. And to give the floor over to Daniel, I'm going to give a quote from Eric N., who is the current chair of TAPS, and who's also the current head of playwriting. And in his quote, he writes, talking about Daniel Alexander Jones, "He is strange because he is free, sublime because his tree is rooted in the night and his leaves are stars, the practical unreal, graceful because he is no different from the space around him. Movement is how his space dreams of home." That's deep. Thank you, and welcome everybody to Daniel Alexander.
Thank you. That's always really embarrassing. So, because we're small, I'm going to switch things up a little bit, and I'm going to condense some of the things that I was going to say in hopes that we might be able to have a conversation about some of the ideas that I bring up, okay? Firstly, I just want to make a few remarks about being back here at Brown. I arrived here in the fall of 1991, and I came here pretty beaten up. Like I had an undergrad experience that was not very pleasant, and I went to Vassar College, and I came from working class family. I was there, on kind of affirmative action 100, which I was proud to do. As you'll see, I'm going to talk a little bit about integration. But coming to Brown, I was so hungry to finish my education in theater, and it was really grace that brought me here, and I will never forget my arrival on campus. And just that first couple days, I met people who would change my life forever, right? Including I think the first person I met was Shea Youngblood, right? A great playwright, and she became a lifelong friend. Then I came to Rites Reason because I came here to work at Rites Reason, and I got to meet Karen, and I got to meet Elma. I think I met you. You had on some short shorts. I remember you had some great short shorts.
I was kind of cute back then.
You were working it. You were working it.
I had black hair too.
You had the hair, and you came in, but it was just, and I said, oh, this is not going to be this is not going to be that stodgy place, right? And sitting on the steps was my friend Don King, who ran the Providence Black Rep for many years. And Elmo introduced me to Don, And Don was like, hey, brother, and he, you know, immediately gave me a hug. And then careening up in her Jeep, rolling onto the sidewalk, was Rhonda Ross. And Rhonda jumped out of the Jeep and she yelled it down. She's like, my brother. And then she looked at me, I don't know you, but you're my brother too, right? And so, and we've been, you know, Rhonda and I talked yesterday, we've been friends for 20-something years. So the connections that Brown gave me were life-altering. And I always am grateful for this place, and for being able to study with Elmo, for being able to study with John Amy, to being able to study with Spencer Golub and the great late Aisha Rahman, right? Anna Devere Smith was here, Paula Vogel was here, just people who, you know, like shook the rafters. And one memory I wanted to bring up before I launch into the talk conversation is connected to Anna. So at Rites and Reason, which was and is a holy space, right? It's more than a building, it's a holy space. And it's a place where an idea was made manifest, which is important, right? There was this sense that when you walked through those doors, you were home. And home was home, right? So home sometimes is like, where's the food? You know, where are the people? It's a little bit messy. It's a little bit dependent on the mood of the person who walks through that door that day. But there was always this sense that when you went in there, you were safe, right? So that idea of having a place where you could call home, where you could root, where you could be fed, was central to my ability to walk through this experience, even at Brown, which was so much better than Vassar, but it's still one of those, you know, it's an institution, as those of you who are here well know, that doesn't always have the best interests of the people at heart, right? Brown is better than most, and I will say that with 100% certainty. But during that time, I was in this kind of crisis mode, thinking about how will my work in the world, how will the questions that I have, how will the ways that I'm interested in making work find their home in a field and in an institution that very much wanted me to follow the rules, right? To be recognizable as a playwright in a traditional way, or an actor in a traditional way, to write plays or write material that moved in a very traditional way. And during that time, I was directing the first production of a play that Shea Youngblood wrote, that at the time was called Movie Music, and later became a play called Talking Bones. And in that play, there are 3 generations of women who run a black bookstore, right? And they argue with each other. It's a very funny play. The daughter is wide-eyed, and she's gone to New York to kind of make her first foray into adulthood. The mother is, all she's concerned about is getting a date, and she wants to sell the bookstore because she don't want to have to deal with all this. And then the grandmother hears the ancestors, right? So she's in conversation always with somebody talking through her ear. And so in the middle, she'll be talking to you, and then in the middle, she'll be like, leave me alone, right? It was really good. It was a very funny play. And there's a scene when the daughter comes home, the granddaughter comes home from New York, and she comes in, she's like, Mom and Grandma, something happened to me. I was in the city, I was walking through the city, and all of a sudden, and as she starts speaking, the language changes from sentences to poetry. And this daughter, her name is Isla, starts to recount a sensory experience of New York City. So she starts listing images that she's seeing. She starts recalling the rhythm of the city. And it's this beautiful passage in the play. Now, at that time, I called myself trying to be a director at 22 years old, right? And Rhonda was the actress, acting that role. And we were there, we were like, what is Isla's motivation? When she gets this thing and she encounters the city, is she remembering being a child that was scared of the dark? Is she hungry? Does she want to go get the food that she's here? And we broke it down like that and scored it, and it was awful. Every time we did the scene, it just was like thunk, right? And Anna Devere Smith was here, and she was the dramaturg for the New Play Festival that year, which, if you can imagine, it's just an amazing experience. And she came in every day, and she sat in the back, you know, kind of like that, like Kathy right now, just sat and looked just exactly like that, and looked at us with pity in her eyes as we tried to make this thing work, right? And we tried this way and we tried that way. But again, I was using the methods that I'd been taught. I was using the methods I'd been taught. And what Anna said one day, she said, "Do you mind if I offer you a suggestion?" I said, "Really, please, somebody suggest something, because this is just dying every time." And she came over and she said, "The girl comes home and she's talking to her mother and she's talking to her grandmother, and then it's church." She said the spirit comes in the room. The language changes and you cannot live in the head anymore. Because this is no more a play about the head. This is no more a play about association. This is no more a play about logic. This is a play where her experience takes over her whole body and it changes her language, right? And she got up in her inimitable way. She was like, you know, she put it in her body and she's doing this thing. And Rhonda and I are like, whoa, Nellie, you know, this is just a legendary artist taking this into her body. And then Rhonda took the script and went, and that thing, I'm talking about, it went from the ground to 40,000 feet like that. Afterward, Anna walked over to a table. It's one of my clearest memories of being here at Brown. And she took her hand and she slammed her hand down on the table. Loud, boom. And she said, "I knew it, I knew it, I knew it." She said, "Stanislavski has no room in this house." Which was a radical thing for me to hear at that moment. Because what she was saying is, you cannot hew everything to a standard that is not the standard by which that thing was built. Right? So that was the kind of liberatory thing that happened for me when I was here. And it gave me permission. Since that time, I was like, oh, I'm done. Like, I'm done. I'm ready to go do my thing. And what I learned was that home, the space, the kind of feeling that I had at Rites Reason was actually the bedrock of how I needed to be making work. I didn't need to go outside of home to find the rhyme and to find the reason. So that's my little prelude. And somebody keep me honest and let me know when we're about half an hour, okay? And then we'll take questions. So somebody throw something at me in half an hour. Will somebody agree to do that? Yes?
Yes.
Yeah, Carlos will.
Carlos has thrown things at me before.
You and Will Barrios. Right? All right, I'm gonna show you a picture. Boom. This is a picture of my parents on their wedding day, October 26, 1968. And I'm showing you this picture, and I will relate it to the title of my talk, Notes from an Integrators Manual, because my parents, as you see, are a quote-unquote mixed race couple, whatever that is. My father's a black man, my mother a white woman. And they were married, as you see, on the steps of this old church. And the thing that has always fascinated me about this picture is the shadow behind it. And that crooked line that looks like a snake going up the steps, right? Always, even as a kid, I would look at this picture and be like, wow, that, you know, it's before I was here. What were they doing? But this shadow fascinated me for the following reason. My parents met in 1966, and they kind of fell in love in 1967 during the Summer of Love. You've heard of the Summer of Love, right? You know, the hippie summer. It was like flower power, that whole thing. Yes? You heard of that? Okay. But they were not hippies. They were 10 years older than the hippies. So they were actually a little conservative, but they had hippie hearts, but they were kind of a little uptight. You know, my mom's from an old Massachusetts, like farm family, poor farm family. And my father was from South Carolinian family, right? So they were both kind of conservative in there. They were socially liberal, but they, you know, they're dancing, they dance like that. You know, they get loose. They fell in love, and then they agreed to get married. But they didn't get married in the Summer of Love. They actually got married when the cold was coming in, October 26th. They got married several months after Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated, a few months after Bobby Kennedy was assassinated, and a week before Nixon was elected. So they actually got married at a time when the civil rights movement was falling into shadow. So this picture has always spoken to me because that was the tone of my childhood, was this tension between light, between a sense of being able to be part of a movement that was a generative movement and a movement for social change, and the shadow that was descending on the country, and the sense of darkness and a journey into the darkness. So my work right now, I'm 45 years old. I have been making work for 20-something years. And most of my work has been in some way in a conversation with the question of integration in America, right? And I'm at a moment personally of reckoning, right? It is not lost on me that I'm speaking to you days after this murder in South Carolina, caught, as they all have been, bold-faced on camera, right? And that the country, in many ways, is more divided than ever, socially, culturally, economically, for sure. So the question that I've had for myself as an artist and as a citizen is, if my allegiance, my raison d'etre for being in the world was to be an integrator, right? What do you do now when integration has ostensibly, as a social project, failed and been failed? So I want to read a few things for you. I'm going to read some pieces from a recent project that I just completed called an Integrators Manual, where I started to ask these questions, right? And I also want to read from a couple of the plays that I've written that deal with this question of the shadow. And I'll say all of this to say that if you come on Saturday night, you're going to see the light. Because Joe Mama for me is the sun, and in many ways where I am personally is the shadow. So I think we're like twins. And hopefully she's the future. I hope. I want to read you two quick quotes. And the first, they're both from a wonderful poet and scholar named Normandy Ellis, who is an Egyptologist. The first is, "The darkness represents the blindness that all souls need to admit to in order to overcome it. It is part of the healing process. We are being made whole. We are being taught how to see rightly with new eyes. We are mastering the serpent energy of desire, the underbelly of the snake. We are learning that we are creators of our experience." That's the first. And then the second comes from a chapter in her book called The Darkest Hours of the Night. And this comes from the idea that in the afterlife, right, it looks like the hours on a watch. And Elma, you were talking about it today. Sunset and going into the underworld, right? And the most dangerous time for the soul in the afterlife, in Egyptian cosmology, was the 5th hour, when you're underneath. Because that's the place of what was called inertia, where you're so tired, and there's a boat. Like when you're in the underworld in Egypt, you get to ride on a boat in your coffin, right? You're like riding on the boat. And then at the 5th hour, you wash up on dry land. And you have to pull the boat. You have to force the boat to move. So it's a very different conversation than being carried along. It's not that idyllic, like angels flying in heaven. It's none of that. It's this idea that you have to go through the darkest, hottest, most despairing part of the night by yourself. And so in this chapter, she says, the darkest hours of the night, by learning to see in the dark, we shall have increased our vision of the tasks required of the spiritual life. The kind of seeing we are meant to have is that of the principal seer, the wisdom of spiritual eyes, rather than the vision of physical eyes. Say that again, the wisdom of spiritual eyes, rather than the vision of physical eyes. Okay? So here's a quote from the book of Daniel, an early version of that, from my grandmother. Bernice Leslie was her name, and she was my mother's mother. Now, she was a white woman born in Western Massachusetts in 1908 on a farm, right? Talked about oil lamp, like had to light the oil lamp at 4:30 in the morning to put the thing in the stove, to start the thing, to make the biscuits. And she drove herself to school every morning I think she was 10 years old, hitching up a mule to a buggy, right? That's what she was. Unlike everybody else in her family, she was the only one in her family to leave that farm. And she ended up going to work at an institution that was predominantly black. Early. And her best friend socially was a black woman. My mother's best friend growing up was a young black woman, which did not happen in the 1940s in Massachusetts, right? So here's a quote from her. And this is about the day that my father asked her for my mother's hand in marriage. Well, they came out to the camp for the dinner, and I didn't think anything about anything, and they sat at the head table, and after we went down for flag lowering, your father came down with me. Your mother stayed up at the head cabin. Your father said, Mrs. Leslie, may I speak with you? And I thought it was quite symbolic. I had the flag, American flag, in my arms, United States flag. And I said, sure, let's walk down by the lake. And he told me that your mother and father had grown quite fond of one another and wanted my permission to marry. Well, I said, there'll be problems. I said, not only are you black, you're Catholic. Some of your family won't like it, and some of my family won't like it. But as far as I'm concerned, you're a fine young man. My daughter has a lot of love to give someone, and I'll be happy if she gives it to you, as simple as that. And we walked back up the hill, and your mother had been pacing back and forth, and they left immediately because they had to tell each other everything. But I always thought it was so symbolic that I had the flag in my hands when he asked me. That's it. This is a piece from my new piece, the Integrators Manual. And this is how it starts. So I had a young actor who was spry and could get down on the floor and back up quick, play. Can't do that. I can't even see anymore very well, so it's tiny print. I'm gonna do the best I can. But his name is Jacques Folimon. So this new piece started with him coming out. He's 22 years old, a very dapper, natty kid. And he comes out and he is playing me. So this is how that starts. And it's a story that's connected, grandmother and my parents. Starts, good day, my name is Daniel Alexander Jones, and I'm fading. This, 1977, Massachusetts, during the early years of forced busing. You might think of busing in the segregated South. Well, it was worse than you'd imagine up north. I was at the end of the second year of the job I was born to do, representing a 7-year-old integrator at Mary O. Pottinger, a predominantly white school. Sitting in a picture-perfect free-to-be-you-and-me classroom with our exhausted white teacher at the table with my friends Shannon and Zenobia and Porfirio. When the world started to spin and I threw up. Little bits and pieces splattered out in all directions. My dad came to get me, my dad. He said, "You've got a fever, Danny. You've got a fever." That fever was a problem because my brother had just been born. He hadn't come home yet, but they couldn't have me in the house with him, so the doctor sent me to my grandmother, which was fine by me. I love my grandmother. She used to run an overnight summer camp for girls. So I was moved over to her house. All I'd been waiting for was for school to be done so I could stop representing and just play. Me and my friends Aiko and Joya and Keon and JP, we were ready for our mashup superhero games. You know, Spider-Man, Batman, Superman, Black Panther, and the pièce de résistance, Wonder Woman. That's right. But the fever set in my bones. I lay in bed for weeks, and during that time, in my fever dream state, the fabric of time and space started to come apart. I started to see things. Really see things. Like the little bits of dust that you see in the air, moving in patterns. I started to hear voices back from the way back from the way back, mixing with the voices and the sounds of the footsteps from the street outside, mixing with the voices and the sounds of the footsteps from the other room, ring, ring of the call, of the telephone, of the talk, 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 back, in, out, day, night, day, night, day, night. I started to feel myself leave my body, look down on my body, and look outside of time. My body grew smaller and lighter and limp. I couldn't breathe deeply, and it felt so good. The water coming off my back, soaking into the pillow, soaking into the sheets, and on it went. When the fever finally broke, I moved so slowly like I was walking in a river. They brought me home, and I heard my new brother crying. I could feel everything humming. The light was like honey on my skin, and I could see a single bee flying through the air, landing on a little stalk of clover. I could feel it like the clover was my skin as it bent and dipped, and I felt that I am connected to something so magical. Before I even had the words, I felt like I had seen outside my life to the light that connects us all. And when I came back into my body, the door didn't close. And so a little bit, even just a little bit, and I'm telling it like a confession, even just a little bit, I felt from that time forward slightly apart from everyone and everything that I would meet because I had one foot on the other side. And even now, when I meet people, I can see the shimmer in them, but I can also see the shadow in them. I can see the past of them, and maybe the next of them. I can see what they don't want me to see, what we all don't want to see. So that's the start of that new piece. You're like, oh, geez. Yeah, it's scurry. But the premise, right, for that new piece is the grown Daniel, who Jock plays, funnily enough, he plays that person, having a conversation with what in Egypt is called the Ba, the eternal soul, right? So it's the Ka and the Ba. The Ka's the one that, like, you know, rocks your coat, lives your life, goes to Austin, does the things that you do, and it's imprinted with the specific experiences that you have. And then there's the part of you that is continuous, right? Is the one that goes through cycle after cycle after cycle of rebirth. So those two get into conversation with each other. And in order to talk about, we sing a song that's based on this picture that goes through a list of endangered species. Right. So, that's my joke. I have bad humor, bad jokes. And at the end of that talk, or excuse me, at the end of that song, Jacques, as Daniel turns and says, there was so much beauty, and I'm thinking not only of them particularly, but I'm thinking of that time, like that sense of potential. Where did it all go? And I say to answer that, we have to go back to Egypt. So it goes back to the mythology, which I've gone back to a couple times in my work, but this time felt really important. And so I'm just going to read a little bit of a dialogue that we do in kind of in character. And I'm one person, so I can't act as two, but I'm going to do my best. All right? So, Ra or Ray? Ra, Ra, ray of light, the sun. Some folks are just born sweet because the sun shone on Ma'at, the goddess of justice. Y'all heard of Ma'at? There we go. So the Ma'at, the goddess of justice. So the sun was all, what's up? And Ma'at was all, hey, feather in her hair, feather on fleek, as the young people say. And then he says, hold up, where does that come from? Like on point, I get. There was a point, something was on it. And off the chain I get, there was a chain, something got off of it. But what's a fleek? They say neologism. You know the people, we will make a new name. And the meaning shall follow. I said, oh, you're just old. Anyway, they were like, hey, moving fixtures in the unfolding idea. Ra, ra, ray, radiating, appreciating the wisdom of that sweet, sweet, just voice, making that excuse to talk each time rising to the sky. I say, I'm trying to remember what you said, you know? All those negative confessions. How many were there again? You know how many I said. No, what? 40? Quit teasing. 41. 42. That's right, 42. You know I said 42. Oh, no, I get distracted. Tell me again. Why should I tell you? You're just going to forget? No, for real, I'm gonna remember. Talking about that kind of dance. Hold on, be right back. Every time sunset, Ma'at continued sweeping through shadow, Ra Ra Ray keeping an eye through a fragment of the moon god Khonsu, till first pink blush swell and cresting over the edge every time sunrise talking about 42, 42. What's number 17? I'm the one that should be asking you, testing you. What's number 17? Look, I'm gonna tell you because I want to tell you, not because you asked. Okay. Let's just be clear. Okay. 17. I have not acted guilefully. Neither have I dealt deceitfully, nor spoken to deceive or hurt another. I have not carried off praise intended for the gods. What? Something about the way you say those words. You got that magic touch. That's right. Oh, yeah, that's right. Don't forget it either. I won't. Really, I won't. What? Well, I'm going to keep my eye on you. Oh, I don't need your eye on me. Well, the eye of Ra is no game, babe. Justice is not a game. Look, I'm going to make a proposal. Well, don't you think it's kind of early in the game for that? All this time you up in the sky and rising over there and setting over there and glinting off the edge of the moon. You mean to tell me you've been stalking me? Not at all. I've been appreciating you. Appreciating the work you do. The beauty of your balance. There's a difference. Go on, you can keep talking. I think we should institute a 43rd confession. Oh, and what would that be? Justice needs constant vigilance. Now, you know, if it's going to be on my list, it has to be a negative confession. So at the end of each life, when the heart is weighed and the list is made, it's a record of what each person did, described by the negative space around it. Hold up. I have not lost my vigilance. And I have protected justice at every bend of the river, every dusk and every dawn, in the aftermath of loss, the swell of prosperity, in the trembling belly of doubt, and the false beard of security. Something like that. Something like that. So, look, your face is almost red. It's time for you to drop on down there and leave me to count my stars. I'm getting to it. But you haven't given me an answer. 43. Sweet and all. But I think we're going to keep it at 42 for now. And every time sunset dropping on down, leaving the spin into the bank of sparking stars around, galaxies thick and viscous as seed, suspended in the darkest matter. Right there! Before and after each beat and pause, beside and beyond each wave, in that space, something sinister nudged itself into being. And at that point, we tell the story of Apep, who is the snake that comes out of the void. He's just pure evil, right? The force of chaos. And in our story, over the course of this play, we demonstrate that it is chaos that unravels justice, right? And that snake comes out of the void. And every, let's show this other slide. So this is a piece that depicts the sun god Ra, right, with a big red disc on its head, and Set, who is the evil god in Egyptian mythology who killed Osiris, fighting Apep, the snake. And in the mythology, right, this chaos, this snake, the force of it is so great that Ra, the sun god, like the good, all-powerful god, is not strong enough to beat it. So in order to vanquish it, he has to pair with the darkness. He has to pair with what essentially in Egyptian mythology is the devil, right? So you have light and dark having to come together to vanquish chaos. And it's symbolic of that underbelly of the snake that Normandy Ellis talked about, right? And I'm going to go remind you that there was that snaky thing on the picture of my parents, right? So when I talk about the failure of integration, there are many valid critiques that can be made of the people who imagined it and who worked for it. But they should never be voiced in absence of the context of the deliberate institution of chaos by all of the systems in which we take part. That served, like that snake did, to unravel what was being made. One of the most salient memories for me as a kid was Christmas Eve, right? Now my family was not, my father was a Christian. He went to church, right? And my grandmother said he was Catholic. They were Catholic so that they could get married, because nobody would marry my parents except the Catholic Church, because they wanted new blood. They wanted the children. You had to promise the children to the Catholic Church. True. But my father later went back and became AME again, African Methodist Episcopal. And so he was a churchgoer. But my mom was not. My mom and my grandmother both found what they called God in nature, right? That was where they went. When they went to pray, they went to the woods, right? But nonetheless, we celebrated Christmas like most Americans celebrate Christmas, like get a Christmas tree, right? A little bit of a pagan thing going on there too, right? But every Christmas Eve, we would get bundled up by my parents, and they would take us outside about 4 in the afternoon, just when the sun was going to set. And they would bring us around, and we would go to every neighbor's house, and then we would go to several homes in the neighborhood that weren't on our street. They included Mr. Burr, who was like a grandfather to me next door, who was part Wampanoag Indian, part black, old Massachusetts family, he had like that belly and a big white beard. He was like, Black Santa Claus. It's true. It included the Reverend Morgan across the street, who was a Trinity Baptist Church from North Carolina, right? It included Reverend Eiffel. Y'all know Gwen Eiffel on the news hour. It was Gwen Eiffel was his daughter, right? Reverend Eiffel, who is the Jamaican AME minister, right? It included Mrs. Bertoldo, who had come from Italy in the 1940s, who still barely spoke English after being here since the 1940s, right? And who was in mourning the entire time that I knew her. Seriously. She wore a black dress, and you'd be like, "How you doing, Mrs. B?" She'd be like, "I'm not so good tonight." "What's the matter?" "My son is so mean to me. I don't know my son." You'd be like, "Listen, I gotta go." She'd be like, "Okay, goodbye." Like, very, very sweet. It included Mrs. Ross, who I didn't know until later was passing for white. And she had these people that would come, drive up, and she always said that it was her house cleaner, but it was her sister. You know that thing. So you had Mrs. Ross, who was passing for white.
Wow.
You had Mrs. Jones next door, who thought that she looked like Lena Horne. And she was very light complected, and she had a very big attitude about the fact that my father lived next door to her. 3 minutes. Okay, this is good. We're gonna go do one more piece. And then we would go down and we would see the Jacintos and we would see the Gooden family, and we would end up at this family called the Pitters. The Pitters had been born in 1898 and 1899. So I got to sit in the presence of people who came from the last century. And they would give us, their son lived on a farm, and he would give them pure spring water from a well, right? And gave us that spring water, and we'd pass that spring water around on Christmas Eve and drink that spring water. And he'd say, "That's the best water you ever tasted." And we'd be like, "Yeah, it's good." So the reality, my lived experience among these working people was a successful model of cultural integration. It was real. It wasn't a fiction, right? So part of what I've had to struggle to reconcile is that I actually grew up where we had a success. It worked. So it's not that it can't work, but that it didn't work. And there's a big difference between those two things. So my inquiry right now is to figure out a bit why didn't it work, right? And a bit what might be possible for it. Is it possible? Is it even desirable? And a lot of people will be like, no, it's not desirable, right? So in the piece, and I'll conclude with this, and I have one more thing if we want to hear it. If not, we can be done. So Ma'at, when you die, you go before Ma'at, who weighs your heart. So if you go, you bring your heart to Ma'at. Ma'at takes the heart. I'm not saying you let it go. I'm glad you're here. But it takes the heart and puts it on a scale. On the scale, on one side is the heart. On the other side is a feather. And your heart has to be lighter than a feather. And what you have to do is you have to go through what are called, as was listed there, the 42 confessions of Ma'at, negative confessions. And you say, I have not done this, I have not done that, I have not done this, I have not done that. And they are the root of, many people believe, the 10 Commandments, right? It's all these things. And what was so interesting, so many of them have to do with not diverting the rivers, not changing the land, right? Like, it's very, very much about being in harmony with the world that we're in. So in this piece, I make a series of confessions. And I just want to, in conclusion, read you this list of confessions. If I can put my hand in there. Where's that? And then I'd like to take some questions. Here it is. Excuse me, y'all. I think I might have organized myself. Oh, here it is. I organized myself out of order. Confession. My father, a black man, was raised dirt poor in a cold water flat. Confession. My mother, a white woman, recoiled from cruelty and learned to imagine as refuge. Confession. My grandma, Daisy Mae, fled the South after her cousin was lynched, and she never trusted white people. Confession. My grandmother, Bunny, left her provincial Yankee family and later befriended many black people. She loved my father and delighted at his engagement to my mother. Confession. In the summers, we were gloriously black in our streets. Roller skating, dancing, untamed hair, elbows, angles, laughter under sun, fireworking hotter than July. I'm talking black, white, Puerto Rican, Asian mix. All of us were gloriously black. Confess, I was an integrator since first grade, yellow buses to white schools. Confess, when asked, what are you? I would say, my dad is black, my mom is white, I am black. Confess, black was not a one-drop stain, but an infinite universe of potential. Confession, I have never wanted to be white. Confession, whiteness to me was slow erasure in plain sight, a white sugar specter unbeknownst. It was void. Confession, the white people I have loved have eschewed that kind of whiteness. Confession, we have Indian blood on us and in us, both sides, secret on the white side and misremembered on the black. Confession, my neighborhood was like a working class UN. Confession, I was viewed as a Trojan horse by blacks and whites, a traitor by birth. Confession, the vast majority of my black friends have white friends. The vast majority of my white friends have few or no other black friend. Confession, my soul recoils each time I hear people announce their identity currencies. As a middle-aged, mixed-race, queer, English-speaking, oldest child, East Coast, Gen X, techno-literate, trans, ally, right-handed, cisgendered, versatile, working-class, middle-class theater artist, I can't think. Confession, I have never felt tragic. Confession, I spent 14 years celibate. No guys would date or fuck me. I also had promised never to sleep with a white man, which complicated matters. And I kept that promise for a very long time. Confession, real freedom will cost you your comfort and maybe your life. Confession, I can't stand an Uncle Tom. Confession, I have never been called nigger to my face. Confession, I have been called faggot more times than I can recall, almost exclusively by black people. And confession, I loved my Uncle Gus. He was a former boxer. He knew Malcolm X and was in the Audubon Ballroom the day Malcolm was shot. He said Malcolm was truly great because he allowed himself to change his mind. Uncle Gus traveled and lived all over Asia and was a Buddhist. He believed you should leave it all behind. So, in the interest of time, we'll stop there. There's more to read and share, but we'll do it at another time. I would love to get any questions or comments or. Yes.
What town is this that you grew up in?
Springfield, Massachusetts. Yeah, which was a beautiful place to grow up in the 70s. It's now one of the worst cities in America, according to every study that is done, about gang violence and poverty and all this. And it was one of the casualties of the Reagan years, when that whole Northeast corridor was gutted and a lot of industry left. So it was devoured.
Have you read the book that I think it's mostly letters of a black telephone worker and his white wife who lived in Springfield?
No.
Yeah, I'll get you the title.
Please do.
Yeah, it's a wonderful book.
Yes.
On the issue of integration today, when you retold the story of your Christmas Eve activities as a child, one thing that was ever prevalent was the fact that the people in your neighborhood had a distinct identity, as in they went against assimilation. They carried with them from whatever region they were from into that community. And there was not a sense of assimilation, but more of appreciation of what they had to offer. And personally, studying Malcolm and studying Dr. King, that appreciation of what you have to offer just as a person culturally, I think may be lacking. I was recently at a meeting with a bunch of community organizers from Central Falls, Kentucky, East Providence, and one of the major issues that came up was now...
Bye, y'all. Thank you so much for being here.
Was now people don't want to assimilate.
Right.
And that is an issue now. And a middle-class white man said this. And I was like, well, they shouldn't want to assimilate. So I think that may be one of the things that is combating each other as far as integration, assimilation, and autonomy. So.
Thank you for that comment. It's very astute and clear. I would add to that and say that in the piece, so we do the whole performance where we kill the snake, right? We do because there was a ritual every year where you would kill that snake that came out of the void, right? And it would come back the next year, of course, right? But the idea is like, you can kill chaos. And as I said, light and shadow are both necessary to kill chaos, right? But where does chaos come from is the bigger question. And the thing that I'm coming to understand is what I'm calling the void. That it's the thing that is before everything that exists in mythology, out of which everything is born and to which everything goes. But it is also the place in the belly of the beast that is always hungry. So when we talk about assimilation, I think about it in terms of this idea of being devoured by something. And what's devouring us is beyond every part of identity. It's so hungry, it's so terrible, that it's very difficult to look at, I think. So absolutely, part of what made that time so magical was that people didn't feel the need to be like one another, but they felt the need to like one another, right? There was this emphasis on you're gonna be a neighbor. And mind you, like I said, next door we had Lena Horne Jr., you know, who she could not stand our family, you know, but she was still our neighbor, you know. And so like the ball would go over the fence, and she'd be like, "Your ball's here," you know. But by golly, if anything ever happened to her, my parents would be there for her. If she saw something suspicious going on in the backyard, she would call the police, you know. So people looked out for one another because there was a belief that if you took care of one another, it would be better for everybody. And that is a very different thing than assimilation. But part of what I think is being revealed right now is that whiteness is a concept. There's a void at the heart of that concept. And so what you have is a lot of quote unquote white people who don't want to be in that void either. Like that it's not a real thing, right? And that hunger for a connection to story and to history and cultural identity and where did you come from and who are your people and how did we do this thing over generations? That hunger is so great. And you're absolutely right. We're at a time right now where people can't get access to that. Can't find it. So what do we do? I don't know, that's my question right now, right? And that's what I'm trying to do. And I think I'm not alone, and a lot of artists are trying to do that, make that work. Wonderful point, thank you. Anybody else? Yes.
I don't know what I want to ask, Daniel.
Okay.
It's just wonderful. I'm listening to you. It's like, this is a lot I have to digest and process, you know, and probably, you know, next week at 4 a.m.
That's right.
Damn it, that's what that was all about. No, but there's just so much going on, because I've known you for all these years, and I know your fascination with the ancient Egyptian lore, mythology, but it's so connected to other ancient teachings, and it seems like the ancients around the world, whether it's, you know, Africa, Asia, South America, Europe, they had another understanding of what this thing of life is that was more profound, I think, and clear than what we think we have now, that we're so advanced and civilized and basically fucked up.
Yes.
You know, I think it's that void, and we kept talking about it. This goes back to the conversation in class earlier this morning about the cycle of life and going from the spirit world, reborn, to that cycle that constantly goes, and it's not death but a baptismal beneath the Colunga line, but what's in the middle. So if you draw the circle and you put a cross, right? So if you're looking at it, you've got the east, you know, just like the poles. You've got east, north, west, and south. But in the middle, where they meet, is the mojo.
Yes.
And that's where people make. They bargain with God and make deals with the devil. It's where the blues men go to make, you know, and so it's when you said that the void, that's where my mind went. It's to that mojo where all the messy stuff of life happens, and somehow we have evolved to become lesser. I don't know, how to phrase all this, you know, but there's an old saying that each generation will get wiser and weaker. And I always said it was curious phrasing. It wasn't wiser but weaker. It was wiser and weaker. It's like the more all this technology, and the more we absorb. So you talked about it this morning. Everything coming at us, we lose that core, and then we're trying to grapple with these major questions of life. And as artists, that becomes an ongoing struggle. So I don't really have a question. It's just a reflection of what you're speaking about and the importance of artists. And I'll close it with this, and you took me back to conversations with Barbara Antier, the late Barbara Antier, who was the founder of the National Black Theatre of Harlem, with whom you got to meet.
Yes, indeed.
And she talked about what's the purpose of art and the purpose of artists. That, you know, and she always said, you know, don't get caught in the trap of the fortune and fame game, you know, but what is this unique gift that we have to open up people's eyes so that we become to some better place. I just thank you for the human being you are and the evolution, and that you as an artist, you are a teacher.
Thank you.
And I really appreciate that, and you make me so proud.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Yes.
I have a question. How do you define integration?
Right.
Because your neighborhood that you described, I lived in 40 years earlier in Brooklyn. And the way I look at the world now and seeing you, you are the representation of the future if we understand all of that we're human beings. So, and whether, hopefully, we can get to a point where you don't have to identify. There's no need to identify whether you're queer, whether you're straight, whether you're black. So, when you talk about integration, I see it that we are moving towards that, but yet we are struggling with the same things we struggled with 2,000 years ago. And so it's a spiritual integration. But I want to know, what's your definition of integration?
Yeah, I mean, I would actually wholeheartedly agree with what you just said in terms of the movement that I hope we are in, right?
Right.
And what look at the people coming down the steps. That's funny. That was interesting.
It's kind of strange. It's like the Walking Dead.
I mean, I think I'll put it like this: when I was growing up, right, in that environment, nobody needed to have an identifier tag. Like there was just none of that mattered. Like you were Italian, or you were Caribbean, or you were you were that. But what was important was the trash man didn't come today. What was important was, can you give me some, chock full of nuts when you go to the grocery store? What was important was the living of life and being who you were. And we had stress and strife about money, and we had stress and strife about who was cheating on who, and you had stress and strife about, you got a gay son, and all the stuff that, comes up that's real life stuff. But actually what I'm noticing, and what makes me concerned, and I don't really have a way to talk about it in a politically correct fashion or a neat fashion, is that I feel more than ever that we're wearing our identifiers now. That people are, like, they come in and they're like, I am a da-da-da-da-da-da-da. Like, these are how the human being gets overwritten with being a black human being or a queer human being or a blah, blah, blah human being. And the problem I am seeing is that when people say I don't want those identifiers, the assumption is that they are equating human being with white, which is not the case, right? That's the difference. So integration for me, I don't even know if I like that word anymore. I think that's just the word that I inherited, that I came up with. But I think we're in a pivotal moment because I mentioned it earlier, there's this great article about Toni Morrison in the Times magazine this week, right? And in the magazine, they're talking about her work in general and the project of her work as a writer and an editor. And Junot Diaz, the writer, is quoted, and he said, what Toni Morrison did was try to break open publishing to include all of these different voices that had not been in publishing. And since she was an editor in the 70s and early 80s, there's been this total dial back, and that we're getting only now a super slim representation of who a writer can be, right? And maybe there's the one exception that's a writer of color or a queer person, but like these names again. But he said they didn't just double down on the old school, they tripled down on it, right? So I think part of what I'm trying to figure out, and I don't have a super simple answer for it, is how do you balance the need to just, as you say, to just be, with a system that is clamping so far down on what it means to be a human being that some people are not allowed to be that and are so overwritten with the racist colonial narrative that they are target practice for police. Like that's just where we're living. So I'm trying to do both, and I don't know how. Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
Karen, go ahead.
I was thinking of the same question as my sister,
Uh-huh.
but
I didn't see that.
but
I love seeing the two of y'all together.
They look like twins, don't they?
It's just magic. It's magic.
I feel that integration, there are certain words, integration, gentrification, assimilation, and there are probably 5 or 6 or a dozen more that are words and notions that come out of a response to fear and hate and less than. And those kinds of movements, the integration, yellow school bus integration movement, was a response to something that didn't necessarily need fixing in that way. And it was like concrete poured out of a concrete truck. It just covered over everything. Integration, the notion of what integration was supposed to be, just covered over everything, the good, the bad, anything that was on that street.
Yeah.
And it didn't matter, and there wasn't any space for any flowers to grow.
Beautifully said.
And that's why I feel you feel, and perhaps others feel, that integration failed. Integration, assimilation, gentrification, all displace aspects of our humanness that don't necessarily need to change or fix.
Agreed. I want to read. Where is it? This is the 24th negative confession of Ma'at. I have not turned back water at its springtide, nor stemmed the flow of running water, nor broken the channel of running water. The flowers that grew wild, I let grow. It's exactly that. It's exactly that. Something grievously wrong was wrong at the top, right? And I don't know how many of the younger folks here know that when they did the huge highway project in the 1950s, when they had to bring the interstate highway through all of the major and sort of mid-sized cities in America, without exception, the neighborhood that they tore down was black.
Right here in Providence, it's evident. It goes right through a black neighborhood that got dispersed.
The Fox Point area got just totally destroyed.
Yeah, and that's that pouring of that concrete, you know, and so that's when I talk about this idea of blackness as a generative space, as opposed to the idea of the void, is when I think about the March on Washington. The March on Washington was a black organized event that included everybody, right? So the concept of what a kind of active, political, engaged, cultural project centered in what we would call blackness is, that's what, for me, is part of what got overridden by this concrete truck you're talking about. And I know it's thorny. I so appreciate that. Thank you for sharing that. And I'm chewing on it. I have, like, as I said, I have no answer. I'm just chewing on questions.
Daniel.
Yeah.
Just because, I have to give a shout out to Rites Reason, since, the Black Lavender Experience comes out of Rites Reason Africana Studies, that this whole notion of a course called Black Lavender, or this annual event of the Black Lavender Experience, it happened in a space that's trying to be positively human without judgment.
Yeah.
The only judgment we might come across is if we perceive someone as being unrighteous, and being mean and cruel. So, one of our sayings at Rites Reason is that, Rites Reason Theatre is the place you're free to be who you are becoming. Because we're all in that process. And we've seen the evolution, and we didn't have a planned diversity, initiative. It was the work, and we let people in, and they came, we said, okay, let's work. So, going back to when you were here, and Lord knows, like when I was a student, I've seen the evolution where the early Afro-American studies classes, they were all black. if you saw a white face, it was like, he must have wandered in by accident, type thing. They grow into the Black Lavender because of students who kept saying, I want to do this. I said, okay, let's give it a shot. And they were black, white, Latin, Asian, they were transgender even, going back to 1998. The thing is, it's the right people. Maybe it's the luck of the draw. It's the accident of birth. You're in a certain space that's fertile ground. Like I said, Brown's got his problems, but it's better than most. But there was something here that allowed us to say, we want to do something different. We want to invite everybody into the process. I've had people, even at Brown, very enlightened people, when they hear about the course, I've had people ask me, well, are all of the students gay? I said, well, I didn't take a survey. I have no idea unless they say something or tell me. But people have those types of expectations. Like when people say, are all the people who take Africana Studies courses black? I said, some of the brightest scholars in the area are Asian and white, But, I guess what I'm saying, it's something in that space that something sent you to us.
Oh, absolutely. 100%. And I think that what you were saying earlier about this question of curiosity, it's like when you have spaces that are kind, when you have spaces that are welcoming, and you have spaces that encourage curiosity and don't censure you for what you don't know, but encourage you to recognize what you don't know and then experience and learn and grow, then it's a whole different equation. Yeah. So that's what, I was saying about being here before. Everybody I was at Rites Reason with during that time is a flower. Everybody's flourishing. Rhonda Ross, Christopher Myers, Nicole Brewer, Etta J. Williams, Rob Bowen. I can just go down the list of the people. And everybody's out in the world planting flowers, doing that thing. You know what I mean? And I think a lot of it does come back to that ethos where you weren't punished for wanting to figure something out. That's a big difference.
And then also, just want to add, because for Open Black Lavender Week with two of my students, Noah Fields and Sophia Rower, they wrote this incredible rituals, spoken word called And Read All Over, and they are identified, if they do, white, but they're in a Black Lavender class, and they dared to write a play within the black-white binary about multiracial relationships, and we talked about it, and love was a character. But I said part of it is having that, I think you hit on the trust factor, that when people come into our space, we said don't apologize for who you are. And don't censor yourself by saying, I don't have permission to write about this topic. I said, yes, you do. Now, you have to deal with the consequences of what you write. But that's why we're here at the university, like you said, to work things out. And I try to work it so we're not in argument, because that's part of this culture here. It's very confrontational. So we can shift the manner in which we communicate from debate to dialogue. Absolutely. So we can disagree and then learn from each other and still walk out the room and go have a coffee.
It's true. I don't know if you, and I know we're short on.
Oh, well, this is good.
Okay. But I'll just say if anybody needs to people not offend me, you need to. But my dear friend and collaborator, Walter Kitundu, who is a phenomenal musician, instrument builder. He won the MacArthur. He's just like one of them space genius people. And he can he builds instruments out of wood for birds to play when they land on the thing. That's who he is. Seriously. And he has a live feed video where the birds come and they land on the thing and music plays in his house. Can you imagine that? Wow. Genius. So anyway, one time I was in Minneapolis with Walter. We were working on a project, and he said, because he's like a 900-year-old little brother in this man's body. He's this way. He said, Daniel, we need to go hear this group. And I said, what? He said, just come with me. And we were late, and it was at the Walker Arts Center, and it was a group called Tartit. And Tartit is a group formed by, it's a musical group of the Kel Tamashek people, which are known by their colonial name, the Tuareg people, right? And they currently reside in Mali. But throughout history, throughout ancient history, they would travel the Silk Road. They would go all the way to Japan, China, Japan, and come all the way back through to West Africa and back, the Middle East, all that stuff, boom, 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 like this, over years. And we were late, so we snuck up in the back of the thing, and we went into this room, and they were already performing, and I felt like I had gone into another dimension, because it was all these rhythm, like 6s and 7s rhythmically on top of each other. The women were the lead singers, sitting out in front, all jeweled up. The men wore veils. They had the men in the back with eye makeup in the back, and they were like, we put them back there. And the women made all the trade, like they were like, we'll do a Q&A, but we're gonna sell our jewelry. And then one person was like, well, what's that song about? That's such a great song. He said, oh, that's the song the women sing when they decide they're gonna divorce their husband. And so I was like, it was just an interesting, it was really good. But here's why I brought them up, is that there was something for me about the fact that their culture is rooted in exploration and contact with many cultures. Their culture, you feel every place that they traded in them. And they've been bound to Mali for decades, if not centuries, because of colonialism. But prior to that, they went everywhere. And that goes back to this thing about the ancient world. The more I said, one of my great teachers at Vassar, the person who really saved me there, Constance Berkeley said, she was a scholar of that area, and she spent many years, she was head of the Sudan Studies Association, she was in Egypt for many, many years, and like she knew it. She knew it. And she said, I'll never forget, it was the first Gulf War, Bush won, right? With, what was it, Kuwait. We were gonna invade it. And we were at in the classroom, and someone asked, why are we going to war? Why, the questions that we students ask our professors. And she got very, 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 very quiet. And she spoke from a place that was the place that I'm just beginning to understand as I get older, which is, I have to say enough that they can hear and that they can be curious, but I can't say too much because they're not ready to hear the whole thing. Y'all know what I'm talking about, that thing? And she took her glasses down and she looked at us, and she looked at us and looked right through us, and she said, it has not always been this way. And that was what sent me out in inquiry. And what I've learned, and I feel like I've only gotten like the crust of what she knows, but what I'm clear about is, as you were saying, the human beings have not always been organized on the planet like this. And what we are calling human nature, which is war and conflict, is not human nature. It is not human nature. It is a cultural relic of a particularly aggressive form of domination on the planet. And that is not bound to any one people. It's a thing that it's like spreading like cancer. Right? So when you get to that thing, it then opens up a whole different kinds of conversation. It is a snake. I heard that's exactly right. It's a snake, And I guess what makes me hopeful at this moment, and then we'll wrap with this, unless anybody else has another question. I feel that there is an awakening to the fact that it has not always been this way. And many of the peoples on the planet, particularly here in America, who've been holding tradition and saying, there's gonna come a time, and this is now the seventh generation with the native people too, where they're like, okay,
Right.
if we do not reorganize ourselves, we're not gonna be on the planet. It's gonna kick us off. So here we are. Anybody else? I don't want to no. Thank y'all so much.
Thank you.
Come here, Joe Mama. It's totally different than this. She don't, you seen her, she don't talk, she sings. I mean, she's good. Shake a shimmy, show a little leg. It's good. Thank you all so much.